Integrity is everything. Our way of life in this country rises and falls on the integrity of our leaders and the integrity of our infrastructure. Because integrity impacts everything, this is the Integrity Podcast, powered by EXO, hosted by Zachary Oliphant.
Welcome, everybody, to another episode of the Integrity Podcast. I'm honored today to have an unbelievable guest and a very close friend of mine, Garrett Ehler. Little heads up on who Garrett is and Garrett's background. Garrett Ehler is a graduate of Baylor University in Waco, Texas, with dual degrees in environmental science and psychology. He was one of the founding employees of EXO, a Houston-based inspection firm focused on maintaining infrastructure for critical industries. Garrett was also an owner and founder of Texas Non-Destructive Testing Academy, founded in 2015, which provides level 3 services, procedure development, and a variety of NDT programs, as well as training for non-destructive testing inspectors. And for the last 12 plus years, Garrett has been a leader as EXO, as a vice president of career development, continuous improvement, and overseeing our wood services business. As EXO's ASNT and ACCP Level 3, Garrett manages the team's NDT program and is responsible for procedural development and review. He holds an ASNT ACCP Level 3 certificates in ultrasonic testing, magnetic particle testing, liquid penetrant testing, and visual testing methods, as well as being a certified weld inspector, CWI, for the American Welding Society. His certifications and memberships and committee positions, publications are so numerous to read. Probably just makes sense that we get into this interview. It's going to be a lot of fun. And I think what you guys are going to find is Garrett's knowledge and experience over his career is really valuable. And hopefully you learned something from today. So maybe we start, Garrett, with how you started, your background, how you started in the business, in this industry, and we'll go from there.
Well, first, thanks for having me. My career started way back. It actually started in the restaurant industry after I graduated college. And kind of an interesting anecdote, going through school, my father always told me, go get your business degree, go get your business degree. That's what you should do. And I decided that I was going to get degrees in environmental science and psychology, and then ended up, as soon as I got done with school, started managing people and managing business. So it's one of those hindsight's 2020 type situation. But started in the restaurant industry, and from there moved into heavy construction, managing an underground utilities contractor, and continued managing people, managing projects, managing operations of big projects through heavy construction, and then got into the pole industry with the inspection. From there, actually started in a sales capacity and realized that I gravitated towards the operations, being out in the field, and what we did on a day-to-day basis when it came to inspections, and realized that I enjoyed it, I was good at it, and it was a way for me to continue learning, which is super important for the inspection business and for technicians in the NDT industry, is that constant need for training and bettering yourself and continuing to increase your knowledge, because as anything with technology, it's always advancing and we should always be learning to better ourselves. But I realized that that was where my strong suit was. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed being out in the field and the constant having to think through issues and problem solve, and that's really what I enjoyed. And as I grew with my technical background and learned from the people surrounding me, I realized that I just enjoyed it that much more, and getting involved on the technical side with different committees and advancing through getting my level 2s, getting my level 3s, and just continually learning that side of the business. I've just enjoyed it, and so I naturally gravitated towards it.
So, Garrett, your interesting background where you've got kind of traditional academic path, and then you really moved more into this highly technical kind of trade skill path is really, I think, an interesting conversation. It's not a standard path most folks take. As you look back on your career, maybe think about sharing a couple of moments, either high points or low points, just opportunities in your career where something important happened. There was some triggering event where you said, man, that really mattered to me, or how I think about the importance of the work I do matters. Maybe give me some examples there.
Yep. Along my career, my academic path has absolutely helped to support my education as I learned on the technical path. As far as, and it's helped me with the professionalism, it's helped me with my soft skills and dealing with issues as I navigated that technical path. For me, kind of a crystallizing moment when I realized that my technical ability had come to had reached a point where I had a high level of confidence. I've always been a very confident person, but you start to realize that there are points that really kind of solidify that for you and crystallize it for you in your mind. And for me, it was a moment, we had a huge project where one of our big customers had an arm failure. They actually had an arm fall out, break off, as they were trying to install it, fell down, fell 40 plus feet, and
wow.
and the arm bracket broke off of the shaft, and they brought us out, and it turned out to be poor weld quality. They were partial joint penetration welds that didn't have the required penetration, and so we were brought in to first figure out what had happened. It ended up being very poor weld quality by the fabricator. And what ended up happening, we were actually ultrasonically testing those weldments and to determine what the percentage of penetration was. And this was a procedure that I had developed and had tested many times and always felt very confident about the accuracy, but it was by design an estimation, and the fabricator was convinced that we didn't know what we were talking about, we didn't know what we were doing, and that there was no way that those numbers were right. And so they decided they wanted to cut up several of those arm to shaft weldments, and I happened to be in the facility as they were cutting up those weldments. And every single one, I was within plus or minus 5% of what I had estimated. And at one point, their quality manager came over to me and kind of leaned in close to me and said, "I knew you were right." And it was one of those moments for me that just it caused my shoulders to be held up back a little bit further, and just very prideful moment for me, and it made me realize that I knew what I was doing.
Yeah, and I imagine in a scenario like that where a client's bringing someone like you in to make those judgment calls that have massive impacts to construction schedules, to warranty claims, to financial implications for them during construction. It's an interesting position to be put in, and where we're trying to be their subject matter expert, or you're trying to be their subject matter expert, and you're having these difficult conversations with the manufacturer. Maybe walk me through that experience a little bit, being stuck between representing a client and a manufacturer that doesn't believe you're right, and trying to manage all of those emotions and relationships.
It can be very challenging. Over the past dozen or so years of being directly in this industry, it's hard to not form opinions, especially when you're surrounded by very intelligent people that know their business really well. You start to learn the way things are supposed to be, and it's real easy to start forming opinions. But at the root of it all, the code, standards, and specifications are what matters. And this is one of the first things that I try to teach young technicians is that opinion is meaningless for what we do. It's critically important that we're impartial. We're basically just a judge, and we are tasked with divining where a part or a weldment or a structure or a widget, whatever we're looking at, we're tasked with divining whether it meets the code or not. And if it meets the code, great. If it doesn't meet the code, then it's a non-conformance to that code. And that's our job. And there are times where the codes can be very complicated, and there's some room for interpretation. And unfortunately, there are going to be people that are going to try to interpret it differently. And it's very important to use logic and to use integrity. And that integrity piece is critically important, because there are going to be people out there that are going to have less integrity and are going to be willing to cut corners. And that's where our job is so hyper important. And one of the big things that I've seen over the years is there's this dynamic in the fabrication facilities between their quality program and their production staff. The production is looking to get the material out because that's how the facility gets paid. Yep. And oftentimes it's the quality team that are looked at as a liability, because they are the roadblock to production. And so many facilities lose sight of that cost of quality. And that's where it's been enjoyable for us, being on the third-party side, to be that outside set of eyes looking in, to be able to say, nope, here's the code. This is how the code standard specifications specify that the widget needs to be built, the asset needs to be built, and we get to verify that. And so it's very enjoyable.
No, certainly, and I'm probably remiss in because we live in the NDT world all the time, right? And maybe for some of the folks that could be listening, maybe we roll back a little bit, and I just ask a question to you: what is NDT? Just the basic fundamentals, and why is it valuable?
That's a great question. So, non-destructive testing is exactly what it sounds like. It's a way for us to test a part without destroying it. We can be able to see things that we wouldn't have been able to see normally with just a standard visual capacity, or be able to see inside things that obviously we wouldn't be able to see inside with our eyes. So, for example, ultrasonic testing, we're using sound waves, high-frequency sound waves, and shooting those high-frequency sound waves inside those metallic parts, which enable us to see discontinuities or defects that are underneath the surface that we wouldn't normally be able to see with our naked eye. With mag particle testing, we're able to see surface breaking flaws that we wouldn't be able to see with our eyes. And this enables us to inspect parts that are still in service, and enables us to inspect structures that, without having to destructively test them to see those issues, which is which is great because the customer wants good. It enables us to leave good assets in place and not have to destroy things to be able to ensure that they're sound. And we've also been able to inspect things and economically inspect things that we would not be able to inspect without being very intrusive. For example, being able to inspect below-grade corrosion using EMAT technology. We're able to inspect for wall loss of the shaft on a direct embedded structure without having to dig down. Normally, in the past, you would have to dig down and an inspector would have to put eyes directly on that below-grade area that you're suspecting corrosion. Well, with EMAT technology, we can do that from the surface without having to spend a lot of time and a lot of the customer's money to be able to assess those structures below the surface.
Yeah, so for those clients, really their problem is below-grade corrosion they can't visually see. You can't see it in a patrol inspection. You can't see it in really any other way.
Correct.
And if they get severe corrosion, then they worry about a structure failing. I mean, ultimately, that's the concern. And so we're able to use this EMAT technology to solve that problem economically without having to excavate, without having to do environmental damage, very low damage to the right-of-way or the easements we're working in.
And it's relatively fast as well.
Yep, absolutely.
Much faster than sending a team out to dig up that right-of-way. And much less obtrusive.
And certainly in excavation, you can also create your own set of damage, right? You can change the backfill, how it's properly backfilled. You can do damage to below-grade coatings and other things as well when you're excavating, which create more problem for you in the future.
Exactly.
Right? So as you think about other value drivers of non-destructive testing technology, maybe walk me through a little bit this thought about probability of detection, right? We see this sometimes with our clients where they say, "Oh, well, you inspected it once, and so I'm good, right? I'm good forever." And really talk to me a little bit about the value of non-destructive testing, but also kind of throwing that against probability of detection and inspection frequency. Maybe give me some comments there.
That's a great question. Probability of detection is a touchy one because no inspection methodology is absolute and not, I should say, not absolutely perfect. There's always going to be a degree at which something could get missed, and you always have that human factor involved. And this is one of the reasons why a high-quality, well-trained individual is so critically important. There is a very broad range of abilities out there in technicians, and on the low end, probability of detection can be a problem. And so it is critically important that, one, the technicians are properly trained at a high level and that they show integrity, because that human variable and all the distractions that can go on with the human existence, unfortunately, can be a driver for poor integrity. And it's very important that the technician themselves have high integrity and have top quality training. And it's important that we understand that each of these inspections is a snapshot in time. And it's what happened at that incident when the inspector was viewing the part or the asset. And it's important that we understand as a customer that these assets are going to be subjected to environmental factors, wind events, corrosive attacks, mechanical attacks. There's any number of reasons why there can be issues that propagate in these structures. And so a continued monitoring is very important.
Yeah, and I imagine too with continuance of inspection or frequency of inspection, especially if you're documenting well those inspections, over time you can start building a model on degradation. You can start building models based on kind of your whole knowledge set on where you should focus your dollars and those sorts of things. So maybe walk me through a little bit. You have this big bucket of inspections. How you can use those to really narrow the focus where maybe you go do something more intrusive, right? Or something destructive. Maybe give me an example of that where you're trying to take all of this data set that you're collecting from a group of field inspections and then trying to synthesize that data and do something with it.
Well, I would say the best example we have is going to be on the lighting side of the business. At this point, we have inspected thousands upon thousands of lighting structures, and we know that with lighting structures that because of that data set, we know that of all the lighting structures out there in the world, we're probably going to see F-rated structures 7% of the time. And that is where having that good data set is so critically important, because we can very accurately be able to tell our clients exactly what they should expect and exactly where their concerns should be. We know that the Gulf Coast regions, anywhere near water, is going to be have a higher concentration of corrosive attacks. We know that Midwest, where it's windy, they're going to have their issues there. Up north, where they're battling ice and snow, you're going to have corrosive attacks due to salt. And so anytime you have a bigger data set like that, it's going to enable us to really go in and crunch the numbers and be able to give the customer a really good information about that data.
Absolutely. And for those that don't know, because we talk this world every day, an F-rated structure in our world is one that's about to fall over. And so as Garrett mentions, 7% of all the lighting structures out there about to fall over. If that number doesn't alarm you to some degree, it should, because that's about what we find.
Especially considering the number of lighting structures that are out there in the world.
Absolutely. Millions and millions and millions.
Yeah.
And we've inspected millions of assets in Exo's history. And when you can start synthesizing that data, and I think that's what a lot of folks don't quite understand, as you mentioned earlier, the inspector's job is to collect data and throw their interpretation against the code standard or spec. Yeah. The inspector's job is not to decide what to do with those assets or those components, right? It's black or white as well as you can within the code standards or specs to make a judgment call. Mm-hmm. And then fundamentally, it's up to engineering, or it's up to the manufacturer, it's up to the client, or it's up to someone like Exo that's going to come in with all of our expertise and say, here's where we believe you should spend money. Here's where we believe that defect should be dealt with, right? And try to prioritize those.
The remediation solution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it goes well beyond just the inspection. The inspection is just the data collection piece. You have to get that right, so you know where to focus your time and effort. But that piece, I think a lot of folks get confused about, that the inspector should tell me what to do. Yeah. No, the inspector is telling you what you're finding, and then ultimately from there, it's a conversation with usually engineering or clients to understand, is it something that's critical or not.
Yeah. Now, there are some cases where the inspector can assist in telling, how can we solve this problem? What would it take for it to be able to meet those code standards and specifications? We see this a lot when it comes to analyzing WPSs and procedures. What would it take to get this WPS, this weld procedure specification, in line with the needs of the code? And we often help along those lines with the customer.
So you mentioned code standards and specs quite a bit, and that's a world you and all the guys that work for you live in. Walk me through, what those mean to you in the sense of what do they mean as an application of a standard, right? And maybe kind of get us all the way out to this macro level view of code standards and specs, a little bit on their history, and a little bit of their application, how they're applied across lots of industries. I think that would be some valuable insight, Garrett.
Well, codes and standards specifically are written by governing bodies, and codes and standards, for the most part, started around the turn of the century in the industrial age.
Now, turn of the century, you mean turn of
the
1900.
19th century, yeah. As far as the Industrial Revolution, and which is funny to me because I look back to my history classes in school thinking, when am I ever going to use this? And now I teach about the Industrial Revolution and how that impacted the codes and standards that for welding and for boilers and pressure vessels. It all started in the late 1800s, when we stopped producing goods in houses and we started producing them in factories, and we started producing these boilers and pressure vessels used to heat and power all these machines and mechanics and everything that went on. And in the late 1800s, these boilers and pressure vessels, because they were all built differently, they started to explode. And that caused the American Society of Mechanical Engineers to develop the first boiler and pressure vessel code. And I believe it was adopted in like 1895. And in 1905, it was adopted across the land in all the states and was made into law. Around the same time, in the early 1900s, the American Weld Society was formed to bring standards for workmanship as far as welding and welding consumables and everything that has to do with welding. These governing bodies, at the same time, ASTM, the American Society for Testing Materials, was started to establish standards for materials. And these standards have morphed over the years, and they come out with new revisions. Some standards come out with revisions every 5 years, every 10 years, or as needed. It really depends on the governing body that is working on those standards. And those standards give us a guide for workmanship. It's a minimum line that the workmanship has to meet to be viable to that standard. Then we have specifications. Specifications are written by engineers and by purchasing agents that dictate how they want a material or an asset built. And those are going to reference back to codes and standards. So a code and standard doesn't really become relevant until it's written into the contractual documents based on the specification, which I always think is interesting because there's lots of different standards out there. There's the American Petroleum Institute standard, which is a great standard, but it's worthless if you're working on structural work, where AWS D11 standard is viable. So so these standards are our guide for how the workmanship of the asset is supposed to be built, and it's critically important. It's so important to us, to me personally, that I've gotten involved. I'm on several AWS committees that assist in writing and changing those standards. And it's a fascinating dynamic in how it works, and unfortunately, it does take time. It takes a good amount of time. I always wondered when I first started diving into these standards, why it took 5 years for them to do a revision, and in this digital age, why can't we move quicker? And then I got involved in it, and I see some of the dynamics, some of the bureaucracy that goes into developing these standards, and now I understand 5 years is barely enough time. So it's pretty crazy, but that's how important we feel like standards, the codes and standards are, is that we want to get involved in helping dictate them. We want to use our industry knowledge to be able to influence them and make them stronger and allow them to be the guide that they need to be for our industry in particular.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. We hear comments from fabricators all the time that we want to do it a different way, or we have a better way, and sometimes you can evaluate that to say, is it better? I think the challenge that we always see is, do you believe you're better than the 100+ year history of AWS or 100+ year history of AS&T and all of these other governing bodies that built these codes and standards on the backs of these incidents, right? Boilers blowing up and killing people and welds failing and all of this sort of stuff. And it's an interesting question when you ask someone, do you believe you know more than the whole AWS society and committees? Certainly we see folks from time to time try to go above standard. But normally we see the opposite. We're seeing people trying to go below the standards of the industry, which is always concerning.
Yeah, especially considering that most codes are the minimum viable standard as a benchmark. And I think most of our customers would like to see things that are above standard and or built better than that minimum viable standard.
And I know that's always an interesting discussion we have because we help a lot of clients write specs, right? Which is, as you mentioned, is that synthesis of the kind of commercial side, integrating the codes and standards into the commercial contract. If you don't have a good spec, as you mentioned, it creates a lot of loopholes. And if you don't have a good spec where you've got conflicting direction that a fabricator could use, that can create a lot of issues as well. And You mentioned, Garrett, this time on fabricators. I think to me it'd be interesting to unpack maybe a story around your time spent in factories watching fabricators. You hit on this a little bit, and the conflict sometimes you have with the fabricator and the quality department. Maybe give me an example of where you saw someone that really wasn't using integrity. And how you could get there, right? I mean, it's always surprising, I think, when we see somebody in a factory or in the field, for that matter, where we're out doing joint inspections, that is pencil whipping something, doing something that's incorrect. Maybe give me an example of that where you've seen that in your career.
Well, it's definitely a challenge on the fabrication side. I don't envy most quality departments. There are a few quality departments out there where the upper management truly values quality, and that makes its way down to the shop floor, and it's very evident. But then there are other fabricators where they talk about quality and they say that it's important, but you can tell through the actions that it truly just is words. And it puts a very troublesome dynamic in play for the quality team. They are put at odds with the production side of the facility, and production is trying to get material out the door. They are at all costs wanting to get the product built, get it finalized, and get it shipped so that they can get paid. And in a lot of cases, that's what the customer wants. The customer wants their product, but the customer wants their product right. And the quality team, that's their job, is ensuring that that those materials are meeting the code standards, specifications, both the customer specifications and their own, in a lot of cases, their own internal fabricator specifications. And it puts in some cases, it can put a lot of pressure on a quality members, quality management, especially when they are understaffed and overworked, so to speak, and they're having a lot of external pressure to get material out the door. And I've witnessed on multiple occasions members of the quality team pencil whipping reports or falsifying reports, or production leads pushing, saying, you need to just sign off on this as okay, even though they know it's not meeting the specification or the codes that are enforced. I've also seen situations where, for a lack of time, something as simple as an eye exam was being falsified. We actually witnessed a scenario during a fabricator pre-qualification audit where the customer was there. The customer was there with us. We were performing the audit, and we uncovered that a bunch of their documentation was actually dated for 2 days after the audit, after the day we were performing the audit. And
I guess if you're going to lie, at least make sure your dates line up, right?
Yeah. And the quality manager admitted that he had falsified the documents, that he was planning on performing the eye examinations, but wanted all the documentation to be right for the audit. And unfortunately, he ended up being terminated from the facility for numerous other issues that were observed, because it's a scenario of getting overwhelmed with all the issues and almost getting beaten down to the point that you just kind of give up on the quality. And that's a scenario, that's a nightmare scenario for a quality person. Mm-hmm. Our technicians have to be top quality. They have to show integrity 100% of the time, without fail, because as soon as that crack is in the foundation, as we know, even with welding, once you have a crack, it's not going to fix itself. It's only going to get worse. The same thing goes with integrity.
Absolutely, and it's a tough world that inspector lives in from that perspective, where they've got to be right all the time. They are doing that at the end of a long day in the heat, whatever the environmental conditions are, freezing cold, right? We have inspectors that work in both environments. And you're right. I mean, at the end of the day, integrity is everything for those folks. And it's what are you going to do when someone's not looking over your shoulder? And are you going to do the right things? Maybe talk a little bit, Garrett, on historically what some of the technologies, the deliverable is, right? In this whole discussion about integrity, what deliverable, the inspectors are usually providing to clients. And maybe touch a little bit on some of the new technologies on those records and deliverables, where it's taking some of that away from the inspector in the field, and giving a little bit better record. Maybe go into some of those details.
Well, traditionally, an inspector, as he's performing his inspection, he's got an inspection report. Most traditional inspectors are taking copious handwritten notes, documenting every single thing that they see and everything that's required by their inspection. And they're then taking that and generating a formal report. And that has morphed over the years to guys using computers and directly writing their reports. We still have technicians that are stuck in their old ways, that like their handwritten notes, and they carry around their notebook, and that's what they heavily lean on. And as we've grown over the years, we've seen the need to automate that and to create applications to give some ease to our inspectors. To make them more efficient, to make them more accurate, because one of the things that we saw a lot of in the past was that transition from their notebook to the report. You've got clerical errors, or if you're like me and your handwriting is that of a doctor, then it's too easy to make errors. And so creating an application to be able to harvest the data in the field has been critically important. And then using our Exo portal as a delivery mechanism for a customer's asset has been a really great thing, a great advancement, because in this digital age, we've got more and more customers that are no longer relying on paper reports. Mm-hmm. They're wanting to be able to go in and see their assets in a digital format that's easy to use and that gives them accurate, complete data. And so the conjunction of the application and the delivery mechanism with Exo Portal is just a huge upgrade from what inspectors were doing in the past.
Now, also walk me through a little bit on technologies like phased array, ultrasonics, and EMAT, what kind of export we can get out of the technology that we're deploying.
Yeah, that's a great question. So traditionally with conventional UT and with mag particle and some of the original methods of NDT, we relied heavily on the inspector's documentation. Inspector would analyze what they saw, would analyze the discontinuities or the indications of discontinuities, and report those. With both EMAT technology, phased array technology, and advanced UT, we're able to do encoded scans, which give us a repeatable, recordable scan that, as high-level inspectors, we can go back and analyze over and over again, and which gives us a much more repeatable inspection and increases that probability of detection. So it's a really great thing. It also enables us to come back at a later date and put programs in place that enable us to look at an asset year after year and be able to directly compare that data to be able to see, has there been any changes in what we saw in 2019 compared to 2020, compared to 21, compared to 22? And that just gives us, like we talked about earlier, as far as being able to analyze our data and to be able to give the customer a more granular look at their system and at each of their assets. We can better predict the lifespan of those components and those assets.
Absolutely. So you hit a little bit on your background as an educator of non-destructive testing and related to your work with Texas NDT and all of your work with Exo over the years. Walk me through what you would tell a young technician that wants to get into the field today, some of the advice you give them, or if you look back over your career and said, hey, what would I tell myself on day one that I've learned that I wish I would have known 10, 15, 20 years ago?
Well, I would say, first and foremost, always just keep a thirst for knowledge. Our field is incredibly reliant on technology, and technology moves at a very fast pace. And if at any point you become complacent in your thirst for knowledge and thirst for learning and advancement in the field, you are going to struggle. Every single day you should work to learn something more and something deeper in your field. The other thing is surround yourself with the right people. I'm a firm believer. You and I have talked about this a bunch over the years. The analogy that you are the mix of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And in my life, I've seen that in my personal life. I've seen that in my business life from a technical standpoint. And this is one of the things that I love about EXO is we have surrounded ourselves with the best of the best people in each of their respective fields. And it's been an amazing thing to be able to harvest that knowledge from each and every one of them and to be able to lean on them when you have questions. And so that's the big thing that I would tell somebody that's new or coming into this is, one, surround yourself with great people, smart people, people that are going to lift you up and make you better. And 2, don't be afraid to ask questions of them. Yep. This is one of the biggest things that I tell every single student that comes through my classroom or that works underneath me. Don't be afraid to say, I don't know.
Yep.
To if somebody asks you a question and you don't know the answer to it, it's okay to say, I don't know, even if it's a customer. What you got to do is you got to find the answer to that question and then learn from it yourself. Mm-hmm. And I think that is just a critical component that so many people these days they forget about. They get too prideful or they don't want to admit that they don't know something. Mm-hmm. And it is critically important that you swallow that pride and go find somebody that has that information and then learn from it. And that will keep you moving forward and keep you moving ahead, and it will cause great things to happen.
I think from my perspective as well, what I love seeing is when you and other technical folks in our business are engaged, and I'll call it sometimes very animated discussions, right, on what is the right answer, trying to get to the right answer for either us internally or for our client. And I would emphasize, especially in today's world where, we've set up these kind of echo chambers of everyone thinking the same way we think and everyone doing the same way we do, we've seen such great value coming out of just dissension of opinion, respectful dissension of opinion, but hey, I'm looking at this way, you're looking at this way, you're looking at this way. How do we synthesize that into the right answer, right? I mean, that's ultimately what we're all trying to do. And I would implore anybody who listens to this, don't lose that. Don't lose that ability.
Absolutely. And I think for any technician coming into this field, be very prideful. Be prideful about your work. And there have been times in my past where I've been a little bit too prideful and stuck on that I was right about something. It's critically important that when you do have dissension of ideas, you need to have an open, logical discussion and be open to the fact that you need to learn from it. Every one of those experiences is a learning moment to where you can get better from it, and take ideas from others. And this is one of the really great things about what we have going. We, on a daily basis, we have a team of technical experts that works together to solve problems. And that's one of the most enjoyable things about what I get to do on a regular basis is not just being able to lead that discussion, but to also sit back and listen to what those other super intelligent, smart people, that their perspective and allowing their perspective to help me broaden my understanding of all the different things that we do, which is just, it's amazing.
And I think the last question I have for you today, Garrett, is, I've had a lot of pride watching you develop young people. Maybe walk me through what that means to you to take somebody that's coming maybe straight out of high school or straight out of a trade school, and grow their career. Maybe give me some examples there. I have to imagine that's got to be fulfilling to watch.
It is, absolutely. And probably some of my most prideful moments, I've got 2 individuals that started with me from nothing. Didn't even know what NDT was. One in particular heard me speaking at a trade school and decided he wanted to go down that route. And Came through, took a bunch of my classes. It was one of those people that used me as part of their network of people that he leaned on. And this guy probably at least once a month was calling me, asking me questions, asking for guidance, and really used me as part of his network. And went out into the field, learning the business, really diving into his particular niche. And about 4 years had gone by, and he actually came back to me looking for me to be his level 3 he was going to start his own one-man show and
awesome.
start performing inspection on his own. And I've now had 2 cases of that where inspectors that I taught and nurtured have come back and have started their own business, their own inspection businesses. So I'm creating our competitors, so to speak, but willingly. It's been a amazing ride to be able to do that and to see somebody grow as a fledgling NDT technician into their own and learning their niche business and taking that broad NDT background that I give them and really dialing it in has been very, very fulfilling. And then on the other side, internally, seeing some of our own technicians that have grown over the years. We've got guys that have been in this industry as long as I have, and have grown so substantially, getting their credentials and broadening their credentials. At this point, we've got 3 or 4 guys that have gone out to get their level 3s in different methods and broaden their horizon. We've got numerous NACE inspectors, too many CWIs to count. And so it's just always fulfilling to see our team growing in size, and then also growing as individuals, as individual inspectors, and being a part of that nurturing and being able to call on somebody and ask them questions because you know that they've got a specific subset of knowledge that you can lean on is just, it creates some really good synergies in our group, and I love that.
Oh, awesome. Well, Garrett, I tell you, I appreciate the time. I hope anyone listening, whether you're an NDT technician or a utility or an asset owner, learned something from today. I mean, obviously, all of your knowledge and experience is really valuable to our EXO business. I know you've impacted a lot of people in our company positively in their career development. So
I appreciate that.
Really appreciate the time, and you look forward to the next couple decades
Yep.
of continue to learn, continue to get better, and making sure that we're all following this mantra of integrity is everything because it's so critically important.
Sounds great.
So
I
thank you.
appreciate it. Thank you.